Hey everyone, welcome to the Recruitment Show. We are talking about all of the major topics that people are discussing right now. Everything recruiting, future of work, and everything in between. I've got guests from all over the world to come and share their perspective and their thoughts and feelings and all of that stuff on these key topics. It might not be politically correct. It might not be what you want to hear, but it's people's perspectives, and it's important to hear people's perspectives. I love storytelling, and I think one story can illuminate a million more and really increase our understanding of these topics. So sit back, whether you're watching live or after, grab a drink, take a seat, and enjoy. Awesome, and we're live. Siobhan, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
I am really good this morning. Thank you so much for having me this morning with you, Lewis.
Pleasure. No, thanks so much for joining me. Let me give some context. So I wanted to speak about a few difficult topics in the DEI space. And of course, you are an absolute expert. So for those who don't know, you're Senior Director of Diversity, Equity and Belonging, Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at Element Material Technologies, wonderful firm. You're based in Dublin. You have your own podcast as well. So you share a lot of your thoughts online, which I love. And I've been following your content for a long time, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for coming and joining me. I really appreciate it. So I think we're going to kind of deep dive into like three big topics, which aren't talked about a huge amount. So we're going to talk about young white men. We'll talk about affirmative action plans. And then we'll talk about some diverse hiring strategies and kind of dive in, explore these topics. And
I am looking forward to duck into this conversation, Lewis, with you and see how many different tangents we go on.
I love it. So young white men, should we start there? I mean, specifically, young white men from low socioeconomic backgrounds, areas. Because I think they're not talked about a huge amount. There's I think that section of society, I was doing some research actually before we spoke. And they're kind of the section of society that are least likely to go to higher education and things like that. And I think, now in this space of DEI, I think it's important to talk about everyone. Because we want everyone to come along with us, because I think, with inclusion and so forth, it's important to bring everyone along with us. What are you seeing in that space? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think that you're right. It's definitely a group that isn't talked about a lot. Maybe even forgotten to a certain extent. When we look at diversity and representation within our organization and areas of focus. And when I think about diversity, it's the difference that we all bring to the table, and also replicating the communities and the customers we serve. And I think that sometimes we forget about that because we talk about our customers a lot. And we talk about the communities we serve a lot as organizations. Well, what does that actually mean and how do we think about it? One of the ways that I like to reflect on it is when I think about who's in the room, whether it's something like a massive global town hall and you have everybody there to a smaller team meeting, and it's who's in the room, who's not in the room, and how can we get them into the room, especially when it comes to decision making. And I've been reflecting a lot on this topic as well. One of the things that you might have come across yourself is the wheel of power and privilege. And some of your listeners might be aware of it. It's a great visual, and basically you can see the dominant groups in the start of in the circle, in the center circle of the wheel, and the more that you go out, you get to the underrepresented groups within society, and definitely white men from socio-economic groups would be very much at the outer circle when I think about this topic. I think that I'm answering your question here in a very long-winded way, giving you lots of different perspectives, I think, because I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer. And I think that it comes down to a number of different factors. I think it comes down to organizations and their maturity and where they're at. I think it comes down to where they're located as well, and the focus in terms of community and what they're doing within their community. And I also think that it comes down to the accountability and the passion to bring in more diversity within your organization. And that could be that, and that can start at all different stages. Sorry, Lewis.
Yeah.
That can start at all different stages, whether it's people volunteering in schools, working with non-for-profits, and recognizing the need to work with white socio-economic, whether it's kids, starting with kids into adults, and then looking for opportunities within organizations to really help. And I think one of the most important thing is remove the barriers. We sometimes put up so many barriers within our organization that stops underrepresented groups in general, whether it's a white young male from a socioeconomic background to members of the traveling community to ex-offenders to people of color. We can sometimes put up all of these barriers in place that we're not giving people with different opportunities, insights that can make our organization so much better a chance to ever flourish.
Yeah, I completely agree. You get so many new, different ideas, perspectives, and all of that stuff. And I think it's interesting because you think about, you can't help where you're born. You're born where you're born, right? Yeah. And also I think so much of it, because I've been thinking a lot. I've got I've got kids, so have you, and you just kind of think about these things, and then I had a few conversations recently, and actually, who your kids surround themselves with, and who their friends are, and who their social circle is, actually has more influence on their life and their outcomes than us parents. Like you have these kind of like cheesy quotes, but they're true. It's like, you earn the average of your social circle, or, your network is your net worth, and things like that. And I always think, these people, you're born into an environment where, it's like low income, little education. I've been watching Top Boy. I don't know if you've seen Top Boy on Netflix recently. For those who haven't seen it, or they're not in the UK, I don't know.
I've seen parts of it. I haven't seen it all.
All right, fine. So it's like, for those who don't know, it's a popular Netflix thing, and it portrays like East London and like gangs, drug dealers, and things like that. And when you watch it, it kind of strikes me a lot that you're born into that environment, and it's really difficult to pull yourself out. Like up to about the guy. You're born into that environment, and then if you haven't got a father figure for these men particularly, who do you look to? Who are your role models? And it's a lot of the time these drug dealers or gangs, and you just kind of you get sucked in.
I couldn't agree more. And the culture, I think it's the environment and the culture that you surround yourself and those that you're surrounded by can definitely. And even in that Netflix show, you can hear them talking about, well, this is where I've grown up. This is all I know. This is what I've been born into. This is where my skills lie. And for me, what sticks out there is the lack of role models, or the lack of people seeing what else they can actually do, and giving somebody that hope and inspiration to say, well, you can actually pull yourself out of this environment that you're in, and you can succeed somewhere else. And that's what really stands out to me in terms of when it comes to organizations and having a duty of care, whether it's using the volunteer. Most organizations have volunteering hours, or some sort of community work that they do. How can we really get into, and I think for me, as being a parent as well, as you said, Lewis, as yourself, getting in when kids are young, getting into schools, talking about and role modeling the different behaviors, whether it's being vulnerable and talking about where you came from, and and maybe challenges that you've overcome within your own life. But again,
Yeah.
to show that hope and inspiration where people can actually feel that they can get to. I know that there's some organizations do that really, really well, and they actually bring in students into their organization and show them around. And just whether it's just a look on their faces, or I know through COVID, some organizations did virtual tours with the kids of what their companies look like. And it's given somebody that bit of hope to say, if you can concentrate on this, and this, you can get here too.
Yeah. It's also just being able to imagine, like, just, you might not even imagine what's possible, I mean, like certainly in the UK, probably in the US and other countries, like if you want to be a doctor, like you kind of have to decide at like 14, GCSEs. You've got no one in your circle or in your, in your community that have done that before. They're not going to give you the advice. You might take the wrong GCSEs, you take the wrong A-levels, you're never going to get into university, you can't be a doctor. There's like all of these things, and it's almost like people, it's about, I think it's getting people to dream big, like imagining what's possible, or even just having access to, to folks that are doing some incredible stuff that you could do too. You'd never even thought of.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think even to take this, I guess, conversation a step further, it's when we do get those folks into our organization and we reduce those barriers. I know that there's some companies that I worked with in the past that nearly set themselves goals for every year. How can we reduce our barriers further? And they're very intentional about how they go about it, whether it's reducing the points or, as you said, A-levels in terms of what's needed to get into the organization. What are the different routes and the different paths that we can create and eliminate those barriers that exist where possible? But then I think there's that step then, the one step further. When we have these folks in our organization from underrepresented groups, how are we making sure that we're creating the safe spaces for them to flourish and be at their best? And we talk about it. I actually talk about safe spaces a lot, and being able to bring your authentic self to the table and bring your authentic self to work when you show up, or the best version of yourself, I like to say.
Yeah. What's a safe space, by the way? Like, what is...
So in terms of safe space, where you feel, I guess when I think about psychological safety, and I talk about psychological safety and creating safe spaces, it's where your team or those around you are able to speak up. They're able to ask you questions without the fear of being shamed, embarrassed, or the repercussions for it.
Right.
And you know what? I think if you talk to a lot of people, and there's so much research around psychological safety, and it's getting more and more popular. And I did my own master's around why organizations are getting involved in DE&I strategies.
Amazing.
And that was a concept that came up so much through the research, where people I spoke to didn't actually call it psychological safety, but they definitely were able to articulate that they don't have spaces within their workplace where they can speak up, feel safe to do so without repercussions being attached. And I think too, coming from an underrepresented background, when you're in an organization and there's maybe a lot of dominant groups around you, you look for, is there anybody like me here who's sticking out to me? And am I able to bring my best version of the self? Am I able to bring the best version of myself into that workspace? And does it allow me to do so? Or do I feel so different to these people that I have to almost put a facade on? It's called covering in terms of the academic term for it. You can tell I'm a nerd and I geek out at this stuff.
I love it.
But there's so much research behind this, where people feel that they have to put that facade covering on all of the time because they can't be their true selves. They don't want to share their whole selves with the workplace because of the fear that they'll be found out, or somebody mightn't like them, or that they don't fit the stereotypical person that can succeed.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that because the only way to really understand is to have conversation, to listen, to understand, and from conversation, wonderful things happen, and you need to be able to have a conversation like that because there has been this phrase of bring your authentic self to work. It's been it's been around for so long, but then you speak with folks. I speak with people, obviously, given what I do daily, one-on-one private chats and stuff, and everyone's like, kind of has, I think so much of the time I hear it's like, they're telling me bring my authentic self to work as long as I believe what they believe. Otherwise, I don't really want to hear about your authentic self to work. And then the stark example, obviously, with that is often politics. It's like if you find out someone is a kind of on the different side of the fence to you, and you work with them effectively in a high performing team, it's really difficult as a human, isn't it, to work with someone that you fundamentally disagree with. And then sometimes that stops people really bringing their authentic self to work. Or maybe you just bring your best self to work. Maybe people don't really want all of you.
Yeah, I think that there's times where you can just bring the best version of yourself when you show up. And you know what, sometimes I say that if I'm coming on a call and I'm coming into my office and the kids are at home and there's chaos behind that door, I close my door and I come in here, and this is the best version of myself showing up today, and I think that's sometimes that all that you can do in this, in some situations. But I do think that they're interesting points that you made there about organizations and conforming maybe sometimes to the status quo. And also you talked about listening. And I think there's a massive difference when it comes to listening to understand and listening to respond. And in so many cases, people are just ready to talk about their point and get in next, and they're not actually listening to whether it's candidates coming through the process and them explaining and picking up key little things, especially those from underrepresented groups, what they may need coming through the process, whether it's the outfit that they might be wearing for an interview, whether it's Wi-Fi and having the technology that they need in terms of how they show up. So there's all of these different cues as well that I think as a leader that we have a real responsibility to tune into. And I think with a lot of DE&I work, it comes to awareness and education, because you don't know what you don't know, right? Sometimes we can be in our own little silos and we're concentrating on whether it's the P&L and the revenue and the numbers that we have to hit. It's a big deal coming through. It's not that we're doing it out of malice or bad intent, I don't think, a lot of times. I think it's that we're just so focused on the task or the job that needs to be done that sometimes we don't even lift our head up to breathe and actually, see what's going on around us.
Yeah, no, so true. The conversation and the listening is massive, because if you really want to understand where people are coming from, or understand their point of view, build better connection, I think conversation is key. And I think there's a difference where you have communication. So much of communication now is like this. It's like, oh, Siobhan said this. What do you think? How should I respond? Whereas when we're having a conversation like this, like we're live, like we're actually communicating. I'm listening to you. Like you did earlier, you picked up on my points, you elaborated on them. And I think that's a real skill and something to be worked on. So I love that. One story I just want to say, actually, just on relating it to recruiting, which was wonderful, is I was doing a search a few years ago, and the client wanted someone who had a degree. It was number one thing. And I was like, do you really need a degree for this one? And no, they were like, wow, I was like, no, I don't know. Tell me, do you really need a degree for this? And we kind of went on. We put some candidates forward, and this one guy, he didn't have a degree, and they rejected. No degree, not interested. So anyway, so I said, look, have a chat with this guy actually, because there's a story behind the CV, and remember, you're hiring a human, not a piece of paper, and it's worth having a chat. It turns out that this guy had a really difficult upbringing. He had to look after his brother on his own, and the whole thing. He couldn't go to university. He couldn't afford to go to university, and he went straight into work. And I mean, the guy, he'd done incredibly well. And to the credit for this hiring manager, they'd actually then, they'd taken the time to speak to the person. They ended up hiring him, which was great. So many don't.
Yeah.
So many don't. It's, oh, they haven't got a degree, they must be, whatever. Not,
Yeah. And I think that you're right. So many, and it's perception and it's bias that we have within us, whether it's the readiness bias that we want them to be ready day one and to go. It's the cultural bias that this is what we have within our organization and they have to have this degree. And then the conformity of those around us and not always challenging the status quo to say, well, do we actually need it? What is it actually going to add? Because sometimes having worked in industry for however length of time can serve more than just going through a college course. I truly believe that having those life experiences and being able to bring that to interview and showcase what you've done rather than saying that I have 4 years. Okay, don't get me wrong, depending on if you're going into a hospital, I would really like that doctor to have studied medicine and to go through
best university on the planet, absolutely.
But let's be realistic about what we're talking about and where those roles actually come in and where it applies.
Yeah.
Something that just struck me when you were talking about both Top Boy and some of the examples, Lewis, that you've covered so far, is I think that sometimes that people think within organizations that DE&I is a bit of it's a tick box and it has to be done. Others think about the business case behind it, and if we have diverse teams, it will lead to this for us. And I think sometimes that we forget about the human right behind it, that like it's a given. These are people, and strip it back to strip back everything else that goes behind it. And I was presenting to our operating board in September the D&I strategy for between now and 2025, and I was speaking to the CEO, our CEO Joe, before it, and I had a slide in, and it was around. I'm sure he won't mind me sharing this. I had a slide jumping straight to the business case in terms of, well, these are going to be all of the outputs if we do this, and he said to me, Siobhan, what about it's a basic human right? And do you know what? It actually gave me a little butterfly in my stomach. I'm like, yes, you get it. And it's so lovely when you talk to people and they just understand that this is a given. We have a duty of care if we're in an organization and we're working with people. It's like the CPO, Dita, she's the very same. She cares so much about the people. And I think that we constantly have to challenge ourselves to think about what are the barriers that we're putting up, and why are we always thinking about the end result? How do we set people up for success?
Yeah, you don't need a business case for DEI. That's it's just you're right. I mean, the company is made up of its people. Right, we're all people's businesses. There's this quote, I can't remember who it is. I'd love to take this for myself, but it's not my quote. It's something like, if your people are happy, everything else will take care of itself. Something like that. If you've got a wonderful environment, happy, engaged, people able to be themselves, safe spaces, being able to have conversations and stuff. What a wonderful place to work. And also, just to test that, my whole career is built on trying to poach people from companies, right? And happy people are way harder to move. Like, they're really hard to move.
Yes.
So it's just also nice to work in a nice place with nice people.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that you're so right that the atmosphere and the culture, you're right. It's hard to get people. There's so many other factors that can play in when it comes to benefits, salary, all of the rest. But if you're in a happy environment, you're not going to get that everywhere you go. So I think that kind of stuff is priceless. I guess coming back to underrepresentation within organizations, I do think that some organizations that you do need to really have that focus, because whether it's systemic issues that have gone on in the past, and that organizations could be predominantly male culture. There could be a certain area of that there's been a certain area of focus, whether it's people of color or gender representation is a huge one. I do think a lot of organizations are moving towards focusing on key commitments that are important to them, which I'm sure that you see in your role all of the time. It's just remembering not to leave anybody behind if we are thinking about our customers and the communities we serve, because customers want to see themselves in the people that they work with and the people that they speak to all of the time.
Yes. No, 100%. What are your thoughts on affirmative action plans? Kind of how they're working, benefits, dangers? We think which leads on quite nicely from what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I do. Well, I have a lot of thoughts around affirmative
And
action.
maybe to start,
Yeah.
just a definition for those that don't know. Like, what is it exactly?
Yeah, well, why don't we start with, I know that we had talked about previously looking at targets and quotas. And maybe that's a nice place to start moving into affirmative action plans. So you'll probably see that a lot of organizations, mainly financial institutions, are setting themselves commitments or targets that they're working towards. A lot of organizations are focused around gender representation, and then also ethnicity, race. People of color is another huge area of focus. Some organizations go in straight with their quotas. This is where we want to get to by X time. Others commit to commitments or targets, if you want to call it. And you know what, I've been thinking about this a lot because I know there's a lot of different views in terms of whether it's good to go with quotas or targets. And I know everybody will have their own thoughts on this. With both, I think, both for me, whether it's a target or a quota that your company has set, you're moving in the right direction for progression. You're doing something. Which is always a good thing. I think for me, I like the idea of targets or commitments. Not that they're softer than quotas, but I think that sometimes when you have a quota, you're nearly putting up that ceiling that you can't get past it.
So the difference between the two is what? So the target is something that you're aiming to get to, and the quota is I can only hire 5 of people of this.
So the way that I would think about it is targets are voluntary. The company has set a target that they want to work towards, and they're going to do it by a certain amount of time. They sometimes, I find that targets can be over longer periods of time, and sometimes some companies can set lower targets, especially more so than quotas. Quotas is a fixed percentage that you want to get to more, and a lot of times in a speedier time that you're going to work towards that quota. Okay. What a lot of the research will show you, or through Europe, you will see that, especially when it comes to boards, those that have set themselves quotas don't often stretch themselves or go past that quota that they've set. Some companies, especially when it comes to having women on boards, and that there were set quotas, just said, no, that we're not going to do this because we don't feel like we can do it right in that amount of time. Where targets, you're working towards it. And I like to think with targets, you're bringing in the right processes and procedures, removing some of those systemic barriers that exist within your organization to help you get there. Some people think with quotas, it's very much ticking the box as well to get to a certain number in a certain amount of time, where targets can be a lot more organic.
I like that. And so targets also maybe enable a company to think about their whole recruiting strategy, right? Thinking about I mean, from the beginning of what we've talked about, how do you outreach to your young folks to get them into your organization, to give them the right mentors, the right education, training, development? Does that targets enable people to do that better than quotas, do you think? Or is that
Yes.
too am I thinking it too
No,
one-dimensional?
no, no. I think that it does it so much better, because I think when you're talking about your targets, I think that you're able to bring followers on the journey with you a lot more than saying, I'm going to get to here by a certain amount of time and we're going to get here no matter what we do. I think by having the commitments in place, um, you're working in partnership. You're working in partnership throughout that life cycle. And this is very much the way I think about it, and the way that I would work with my colleagues. We call them center of excellences within Element. So where I'm the center of excellence for DE&I, we have Mike Dowd, who's the center of excellence for talent acquisition. I know you're smiling because you know Mike.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, lovely guy. Lovely guy.
We have Camilla, who looks after the whole talent management and the education and the L&D kind of side of things. So how can you all work together to make sure that you're impacting that talent life cycle, that you're not just going straight for your number and you're ticking boxes as you get there? You're doing it in the right way to bring about change, but also you're bringing hiring managers and other leaders within the organization on the journey with you. And it comes back to that, what are the outcomes of having more diverse teams and having better representation within your company? You're not going to fall into that group think. You're going to have better conversations. You're going to have more innovation, ultimately leading to better financial results. I think the difference with quotas is sometimes that you lose people along the way by having quotas, because they feel like you're hiring a certain person just to tick a box to reach your number, where you're going with the target. You're actually making all of the change on the way to actually get there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And for me, I kind of think of it like the difference between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. And I think for me, equality of opportunity is way better, right? Because equality of outcome never works. Like, we all have different skills, strengths. If I'm running a race against Usain Bolt, I'm never going to be, he's going to beat me every time. So I think for me, equality of opportunity is something to really strive for, like to give everyone an opportunity to, to better themselves, to do something with their lives and money, all of those things. And I think from what you've described, I think targets is a good way to do it, because, everyone is behind it, and it's a wonderful thing to aim for. And what can we then do about it? And then that stems into how you recruit, how you train, how you do everything, how you operate.
Yeah. Do you see it a lot, Lewis, from within your role, where there's companies then that are working towards quotas? And does that come up a lot in your conversations when it comes to hiring and through the searches?
So I have way too many conversations with people. So when we're hiring, I have a lot of people that say, Lewis, we want a woman for this one, or we want a diverse candidate for this one, or of course, Lewis, we don't want a man for this one. And I hear that too often, and I don't like that, because it doesn't feel comfortable. My whole philosophy, my beliefs, everything is, I don't discriminate. I don't care who you are, where you've come from. I really don't, like for me, it's when we go out and we source candidates for companies, it's, you like, well, what's the job? What skills are you looking for? What are they going to be doing? What does success look like? Things like that. Then we go and, we go and source and find people. And for us, like the way I kind of do is I say to them, look, we'll go and source, we'll get a huge list of candidates. I mean, we're speaking with hundreds of people. We'll go through them with you. This is who they are. And they can start to kind of take a view as to the types of folks that are in the talent pool. And then, and I do it like that, because I'm not comfortable selecting based on gender, religion, race. Like, it just doesn't sit. I just can't do it.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice segue into affirmative action plans, and why like, I think the benefits of having action plans, for me, it's making sure that we're removing discrimination and we're removing bias from our processes. We're looking at the different job categories that we have within our organizations, and to make sure that there's consistency in the different people that fall into the different job brackets, but also that we're removing any discrimination, or we're fixing any errors that may actually exist within our organization, whether it's through looking at pay and gender pay equity and making sure that that's right. But the education for our leaders, I think, here is, when we come to affirmative action plans, what are we doing to make sure that we're giving everybody an equitable chance right from the get-go? So when we have an open role within our organization, that we're not just saying, Lewis, I want a whole pile of people of color here coming in now. No, look, every organization will tell you that they want the best candidate for the role. They want the best of the best, but then certain people will say, well, but out of those best of the best, we
I
all
think that's the thing. It's interesting, but you know what? I mean, look, let's be honest. I mean, something like, we all have different preferences, right? Like men, women, and I know, look at tech is a good example, right? Like there's a big drive to get more women, girls, like my kids, my 3 girls, really trying to get them into science, technology, etc. You look at like a technology role, there's way more men in tech. It just is, more and more women are coming in, but there's more. So if you're, if a company is looking for a senior technology person, their talent pool is going to be skewed towards men, and then, I don't know, you look at something like HR, or marketing, there's many more women choose to go into that. So, there are just general like facts and stuff. But I think with technology is interesting. It's like, well, what can you do about it? And it's, I think for me, it's reaching down into schools, it's volunteering, whether you're sponsoring stuff, providing money, providing your time, role models. Like it's just, I think for me, like that's really the way. It's like if my daughters see an incredible lady as, I don't know, a top e-gamer, because e-gaming is a legit career choice nowadays. They might be like, oh, actually, I want to do that. So I think for me, that's what companies can do better, is really reach down into schools and so forth.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think that it definitely starts with that education and role modeling from the schools. And then I think too, it's not always looking in maybe the most conventional ways, like going to your LinkedIn and looking to see, well, who's there and who's up for grabs to come into this interview pool. It's looking at like the non-for-profits that exist around us. Like there's so many amazing non-for-profits that are out there, like the apprenticeships, the internships. What are the other ways that we can bring people into our organization?
Well, for me, what I've really noticed, sorry to interrupt. I mean, for me, and maybe COVID was a little bit of a catalyst for this, was companies looking more broadly. Like, does the role have to be in Dublin? Does the role have to be in London? And when you can source more globally, hey, like your talent pool gets more diverse. Suddenly you have more options, more choice. And that for me, it's just been a wonderful thing. And I've seen that have a huge positive impact.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such an important point, that global mobility and being open to trying it, being open to that talent pool that it will open up for you. So yeah, I love that. I even think, even if you weren't to go that far, I think, I don't know if I should even bring up this topic, but return to work, return to the office, I think is another area that can potentially bring barriers, or put barriers in place for some people too, especially coming from underrepresented groups, whether it's like the transport to get into the office, whether it's the funds to pay for buses or taxis to do that. There's different barriers that go along with that as well, as you think about returning to office.
Yeah, huge. Because these last few years, I drop my kids off at school every day, and there's way more guys dropping their kids off. Like these last few years, way more, which is great, because a lot of the time, you just before COVID, and I dropped my daughter off. There wasn't not many men were dropping their kids off because they had to be in, or it was just more women. And over COVID, there's been more and more men, which has meant maybe more women can go back to work, and it's just been a little bit more balanced for me. Suddenly, though, there's more and more companies wanting people in the office 4 or 5 days a week, and that's going to have a little bit of a knock-on effect, I think, on some of this stuff, which will be sad, because I think we've come a long way on that regard.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think if I bring it back to research, a lot of research would have shown that, prior to COVID and during COVID as well, when it came to responsibilities of like taking care of the kids or being a caregiver to parents or neighbors and those around you, a lot of that would have come to the women within the homes. And I think that then, it has an additional pressure, I guess, when it comes to work and the flexibility of women to be able to succeed in the workplace, and that pressure that it puts on for them as well.
Yeah, so true. Well, think carefully, message to companies, if you really need the role 5 days a week in the office, and it'd be done from home. And because I think also, if you're as a company flexible with that, you're going to get more options. You're going to get a whole bigger pool of talent, and you're going to see some of it will be a more diverse pool. And again, it's, giving people opportunity, right? Like, some people might not be able to apply for your job in the office 5 days a week because they've got to pick up their kid one day a week. You just never know, right? And it's sad to exclude people like that.
I completely agree. I think, and also just to add to that, I think that, Lewis, as well, when you give people that bit of flexibility, now don't get me wrong, there's certain roles that you have to be on site for. That's just it's a given, you have to be there. But I think where you can have that room for flexibility, I just think that you get it back so much from your colleagues and those that work for you. And like, I know that when I'm finished, I can still come back in here into my home office and tap away at something, And I think that, I just think that employers can get so much more and people give back so much more when they feel that it's reciprocated from their employer as well.
Yeah, definitely. Remember, it's not an adult kindergarten. So, we're grown-ups and things like that. But also the other, just kind of to note on this also is, it's give and take, like employer gives, employee gives, because, people are paying your salary. You need to work hard in life, like some of the most successful people that you see around, they work hard. So, it's give and take. I think it's give and take. So,
and
good place to end, I think, Siobhan. Thank you so much.
You are so
really welcome. Appreciate you coming on. Pleasure. And if you're not following Siobhan, she's on LinkedIn. Follow her. She does great content. And thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks so much, Lewis. Really enjoyed the chat.
Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Please do not forget to subscribe in all the usual places: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you like to watch or listen to a podcast. Any comments or feedback, please drop us a DM. If you've got anything that you want us to discuss, again, feel free to get in touch. Have a wonderful day.